I feel like I've got a good wolf and a bad wolf inside me. Yanto the entrepreneur, Yanto the cyclist, Yanto the family man, Yanto the stoic. Basically, you can't retire from a sport that you did for 20 years or 25 years, whatever, and then jump out and then within a week or two be fully up to, the same level in a new identity. That just doesn't work. It takes another 5 years. So I literally divided my day into halves. In the first half of the day, I was a pro bike rider, and I went out and I did my 5 or 6 hours. I came home and I had lunch. And the second half of the day, this is for the first 7 years of this business, I remained a professional cyclist. And I was pro Conti for a couple of years with the One Pro team. So I went to 11 different countries that season, spent however many hundreds of days away from home. And I was checking my emails, looking at spreadsheets on the team bus on the way back from Tour of Burgos, 180 Ks with Contador, smashing my head in, and all the other guys that were there. And then I'm trying to focus.
Yanto Barker, welcome to the Roadman Cycle Podcast.
Thank you very much.
Yanto, we were talking off air a little bit about Stoicism, and as we were talking about that, I almost wanted to jump in and say it then, but I was like, I'll save it till we record because it seems quite fitting to your story. There's this brilliant Stoic fable, and it's about a family and a son living in a small village. And the son and the father are kind of the two central characters to it. So one day, they're all poor families in this village, and one day this herd of horses rambles onto the family's land, and they stay there, and all the neighbors come along and are like, oh my God, you've untold wealth that none of us have. This is amazing. And the father responds, good thing, bad thing, who knows? And a week later, the son falls off one of the horses and he breaks both his legs. And the neighbors come along and they're like, oh my God, that's the worst luck I've ever seen. And the father responded, good thing, bad thing, who knows? A week after that, the local militia roll through and they say, we're enlisting everyone under the age of 18 to fight in this child army. The kid can't go to war because he has two broken legs. And the villagers come past and they're like, oh my God, you're so lucky your son didn't have to fight. He said, good thing, bad thing, who knows? When I think about your story, I just think good thing, bad thing, who knows? British junior champion, good thing, bad thing, who knows? Into the pro ranks, you seem to get a little stuck. At the time, you would have had the villagers coming up to you and saying, oh my God, what horrible luck, what a bad thing. But as it transpired, hasn't been bad luck at all, has it?
Well, it all depends on what sort of time frame you look at, doesn't it? I love that fable, by the way. We were talking off air, and I was saying I've only come into Stoicism fairly recently, thanks to a chairman that I'm working with at the moment. It's a fantastic guy. But I love that fable, and I've actually known about it for longer than I realized that it was a Stoic fable. And at times of sort of stress and high pressure, I remind myself of it, and I think, it's easy to get caught in the moment and say, oh, it's bad luck, or, someone else has got it better than me. That's a classic, isn't it? Especially if you're in your 20s. But actually, you do need to sort of take a broader view, and it does help overcome or deal with what can feel like really, really high stress moments in your life. Because if you just only, immerse yourself in that one moment, then of course you're going to feel like that, and you have to kind of spread it out a bit.
Can you take me back to 25 years of age when you walked away from cycling? Because I know for me, and projecting my emotions around that time onto you here, like my whole world then was quite cycling focused, and I only seen really one path that I could enjoy as a career forward. I had different career options, but that was the one I was like, this is what I want for my life, and I'm going to do anything to get there. And I felt like I worked harder than everyone else. I felt like I put in so much more, yet I just didn't get that output. What was your head like back in 2009 when you decided to walk away?
It's probably very similar, very, very similar to what you just said. And I didn't walk away. I felt like I jumped off because while I wasn't world tour, right? But I had been GB team, 5 world championships, 2 Commonwealth games, plus being looked after, in a manner that you become accustomed to that you don't realize is pretty unique. And when I stopped, I literally jumped off and down into quite a scary place, I would say. And all my emotions and all my identity attached to who I'd become and who I'd built up. I've been doing it for already 10 years at 25. I left school at 16 to be a full-time cyclist. And so a decade of commitment, dedication, motivation, that burning drive and fire in your belly to go out and do 6 hours day after day after day and compete and take the risks in bunch sprints and, in the middle of nowhere often, to get the results you needed to move up the ladder was complete and full. And then to kind of leave that behind was actually very depressing. That was it took me a while to realize, and I probably am self-diagnosing myself like 10 years, more than 10 years, sorry, like 25 years later. But yeah, I think I was depressed. That was pretty much my predominant feeling afterwards.
How do you rebuild the identity piece? Because the only version, right now you're wearing multiple hats. You're Yanto the entrepreneur, you're Yanto the cyclist, you're Yanto the stoic, you're Yanto the family man. Right back then, you're only Yanto the cyclist. How do you go about rebuilding that identity?
Yeah, well, this is still really, really relevant. And I have this conversation with a few of my peer ex-teammates or friends that have been pros. And I don't want to make this the podcast of fables, but there is another one that I really, really think about, which is a young Native American boy asks one of the elders, I feel like I've got a good wolf and a bad wolf inside me, and they fight over doing the right thing or doing a bad thing. And the little boy's a bit nervous, and he says to the elder, which one's going to win? How do I make sure the good one wins? And he says, how do I know I can rely on the right one? And the elder says to him, the one that will win is the one that you feed. So basically, transposing that kind of fable onto the question that you asked me around Yanto the entrepreneur, Yanto the cyclist, Yanto the family man, Yanto the stoic. Basically, when you start feeding those identities, they get stronger and they become more substantial in your character, in your life. And I say this because it's a really, really interesting process to retire from anything, and not just sport. And especially if you've over-indexed into that sport or that activity, it's become a really big part of who you are. You end up being quite weak in other aspects of your life and other parts of your character.
Yeah.
And they need some nourishment. They need some feeding, which a lot of people don't quite realize, partly because it's really hard to get to the roots of these things. And secondly, it takes time. So just like training, you get better and better over years and years. You can't retire from a sport that you did for 20 years or 25 years or whatever, and then jump out and then within a week or two be fully up to, the same level in a new identity. That just doesn't work. It takes another 5 years, and you have to commit to it. It has to be consistent, and you have to be dedicated to it and know that it's making progress, even though you can't necessarily see that progress happening or feel it, being done. And I think that's been such a big part of my retirement process that I've spoken about with lots of my friends, because there's actually a little bit of a laziness in me, which is to still be the cyclist, even though I'm 8 years retired now. So like I say to my wife, like, I'm going to go out on my bike because I like riding my bike. I feel good. I'm in my strength. I'm in a place, that I know of myself. I'm confident. I'm good. I feel really, really good. So I don't do other things like, other sports, let's say, or other activities that like yoga or I don't know, whatever. And so I'm kind of still feeding that cyclist character, that cyclist wolf that I said in the fable. And it's a bit out of date now because it can take over. Sometimes I enter a race and I can feel myself like this beast getting switched on, and it doesn't know how to do half and half. It only knows how to do 100%. So you have to be quite careful with that, because I don't think it's right for it to take over. You end up with people who you're a bit narrow in their character because they've only been one thing and that's all they care about, and at the detriment to lots of other things. Anyway, I think that's been
wonder
a really
about like our development pipeline for our athletes, because our development. I came from a soccer background, and our development pipeline is very much, you get 100 kids, put them all into an English club. One of them will survive, and 99 of them, their prospects are pretty fucked. They've dropped out of school early. You've definitely taken them on a road that's less beneficial to them in terms of their long-term development. And I know you're good friends with Bradley Wiggins, and I often look at Bradley and think, by any metric, if we just look at this through the narrow lens of cycling, Bradley's a runaway success. like so many world titles,
Yeah,
Tour de France
yeah,
champion. But if we zoom out and take
yep,
off just the cycling focus lens and put a broader human lens onto it, is that what we want to tell
yep.
kids that success is? Because Bradley's come out of the process that's made him a champion is also a process that looks to have quite badly damaged him in the process.
Yeah, definitely. I think Brad is a real example of someone who's the product of his experience and his conditioning. He says himself that he was institutionalized into cycling. And I think he, bizarrely, same age as me, a couple of months younger, he, as a more track focused rider, got a lot more support from GB, then went on and his career took off in a way that, I would have dreamt about at the time. But in Sky and GB at the time, they implemented a very extreme process to shelter athletes from any distraction, any discomfort, any psychological, distraction away from just doing their job, which is riding their bikes and delivering results, to the extreme that I think has been a huge detriment, more than any other nation, and Team Sky probably more than any other World Tour team. Basically removed any obstacle outside of direct focus of training and racing for the athletes. That meant they had no capacity to deal with almost anything outside of that very, very narrow sphere, and therefore didn't develop the ability to know what to do about it, how to deal with it psychologically, emotionally, and then also forming part of their identity. They just weren't used to it. Brad is the same. Victoria Pendleton has got a bit of it as well. Cav is not quite the same, but you can see sort of hallmarks of the same watermark, if you like, of that characteristic that is really, really hard when you step out of that narrow band of purpose, which is being a professional athlete. And up until probably 4 or 5 years ago, I'd have said, wow, I'd take Brad's career ahead of mine any day. You know what I mean? Like, this sounds a bit harsh, but now I think not at that sacrifice. Like, not, honestly, not for the rest of your life to feel like, you're not who you want to be, or you don't feel comfortable in your own skin, or, Brad's made this really public and done lots and lots of interviews about this. So I'm not speaking out of turn, and, I'm just talking about things that I've read directly from his previous interviews. But yeah, I think that's been the good luck, bad luck story. Who knows? You have to apply that in a similar way to, his life and say, well, I'm not sure actually.
And when we look at a narrow focus and we say, would you take Brad's career over your career? Well, maybe that's an easy answer. Like, Brad won the Tour de France and so many, amazing races. But if you zoom out and you go, well, would you take Brad's life over your life? The answer is probably no.
Yeah, that's not to be competitive about it, but it's just, the challenges I faced that you have a similar sort of experience of, they made really important parts of my character strong and able to cope. I think in my role, as you'll kind of feel as well, when you start businesses and you're a founder, a lot of the time you spend outside of a structure that is a safety structure that most people live within. And you're building the structure for other people to feel safe, to do their jobs and not be distracted. But, for me, there was a long period of time where if the company didn't work, financially, I would be personally bankrupt because I was taking out personal loans to make sure that we could cover the cash flows required within certain dips in the seasonality. Like, I would have been totally screwed if, I'd never get a mortgage on my house. I had no qualifications anyway, so I set up one business that would have failed, so I'd be 100% failure. Those types of situations create a lot of pressure that if you don't have some pretty fundamental, building blocks and foundations to cope with, those are the sort of things that create, mental breakdowns, like real proper mental breakdowns.
When you went to rebuild this second version of your identity, where you decided to step away from Yanto the cyclist to becoming Yanto the entrepreneur, at what point did you realize a lot of the skills you learned as a bike rider, hard work, resilience, etiquette, when did you realize these were transferable skills?
Right from the beginning. Yeah, really, really early. So the interesting thing that I did was I started to build the new identity while I still had the old identity. So I literally divided my day into halves. In the first half of the day, I was a pro bike rider, and I went out and I did my 5 or 6 hours. I came home and I had lunch. And the second half of the day, this is for the first 7 years of this business, I remained a professional cyclist, and I was pro Conti for a couple of years with the One Pro team. So I went to 11 different countries that season, spent however many hundreds of days away from home. And I was checking my emails, looking at spreadsheets on the team bus on the way back from Tour of Burgos, 180 Ks with Contador, smashing my head in, and all the other guys that were there. And then I'm trying to focus on what I need to do for work to make sure I cover the emails and I keep the work streams moving and all that kind of stuff. I'm saying that now because in my psychology, in the mornings, I was strong, confident, and an expert. In the afternoons, I was weak, learning, and a novice. But the fact that I had both those experiences to such extremes in the same day, they balanced out to me being pretty good all the time. Instead of, if I'd have retired from cycling in 2010 or 9 or whatever, run this business full-time, 100%, I'd have been a novice the whole time. And as you said earlier, there are decades and decades to get really good at entrepreneurialism and business. But I am like 15 years in now, and I'm not where I was when I started. But where I started was very, very, very low down. And I'm really grateful that I gave myself that opportunity, which required probably a lot of energy that a lot of people wouldn't have, because, I was doing 6-hour rides. And on big race weeks, I'd have to write myself a to-do list before, so as I could actually focus my mind and do the right things when I got back, because I was totally fucked from 5 days of 200K stages. But the to-do list kept me on track, made sure I was productive, and meant that I didn't stand still in those weeks when I was away racing and dedicating my energy to that. I could come back and I was still keeping everything the other side of my life moving. But yeah, it was hard. I was working 7 days a week for 7 years.
There's a great lesson in there for anyone listening to the podcast who is single focused, be that on sport, be that on just family, or be it on entrepreneurship. When you only have one strand to your bow and you have a bad day, all of a sudden you're a bad person. Like if you're just a bike rider and all of a sudden you go through a dip and you're shit at bike riding, it's like, oh, my life is shit. But for you were able to parse these two into two separate entities where you could have a bad day on the bike, but a good day on business, and all of a sudden it's still a win. I think that's a very important psychological twist.
It's 100%. You're 100% right, and it was like, I can't emphasize enough how sport is up and down anyway. Like, you have a good result on a good day. It is literally hour to hour. You could be 100% happy as you could possibly be, and then 100% as depressed as you could possibly be about what you're doing. Business is actually a little bit slower. Like the peaks and troughs are much more rounded. So you get a flow to things. And I would say they're more quarterly, whereas racing was daily or hourly. And I also found, interestingly, that I couldn't stress about both my jobs at the same time. So if I was having a really tough time at work financially, like worried about cash flow or whatever, or sales, when I was on my bike, I had a forced rest. Like I just couldn't worry about it and do my intervals. So those intervals were like 5 hours of no screen time, fresh air, good blood circulation, good exercise. Plus I was knackered. So when I was really stressing at night, if I'd done a good ride in the day, I also couldn't keep myself up because I was knackered. So I always had a good night's sleep. And those things were bizarrely complementary. Equally, if I had a bad race, I go to work and I'm like, well, I'm building my retirement plan. I've still got, I've got some good sales in the pipeline. I've got a good, marketing plan developing here. And it really, really helped even out those peaks and troughs that we all go through. But yeah, certain situations or certain roles definitely create a different rhythm.
Another area I think bike riders are brilliant at, and we could spend the next 10 hours talking about areas bike riders are shite at, but it's easy to highlight areas we're good at. Goal setting. People in normal life aren't as good as bike riders at goal setting. Like cyclists at a certain level break everything down into what's the goal of today's session? How does that fit into my weekly plan? How does this fit into my training cycle I'm in? What's my 2 or 3 main targets for the year? And if you take that down and you bring it across into a business sense, it's like, whoa, I'm a level up here on my peers instantly.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. So I listened to a really interesting podcast. It was actually a guy that works for Elon Musk, and he said it was crazy how Elon made his decisions, which basically he does boil down to every single decision of any size. Is this getting us closer to space travel, or is this getting us further away from space travel? And he said that is the simple prism with which he makes every decision. And I remember saying this to my wife quite a lot, because when I was a pro bike rider, every single decision I broke down to, is this making me faster or is this making me slower? And I mean every single thing, from what I ate, to how much I trained, to who I hung out with, to how much I walked, to what social stuff I went to how much sleep I had. Everything was faster, slower, simple categories. When I retired, I found that really hard, because I didn't have quite the same simplicity, in that I could eat what I wanted. It didn't matter if I was 2 kilos overweight. I could walk around if I wanted, because it didn't matter if I was standing up for an hour extra than I needed to that day. And I've actually struggled to recreate the same simplicity in my work, even though obviously I'm very focused, and we are focused, and we are clear on our objectives. But I think it's true what you said, with a life of, and I don't know your personal, how much coaching you had in sport, and how much sort of resource and expertise, because from a GB team perspective, I was lucky in that, I spent time with Steve Peters, who I absorbed so much information from in a fairly limited amount of time, but it was huge in forming who I am and how I approach the world, in the way you just described, around making an objective and then breaking it down to smaller and smaller increments. So as literally hour by hour, you know what you're doing. And also, hour by hour, you can see the incremental progress you're making, which then gives you motivation, keeps you focused, and gets you excited about achieving the big goal when 6 months' time or whatever the big goal happens. Those are pretty important skills, I would say.
Do you think it's like that decision-making metrics we use as a cyclist? Is this going to make me faster or slower? I remember going to, cycling was a runaway train that destroyed so much of my personal life, through my 20s. I remember going to the cinema with my ex-girlfriend and eating a bag of spinach when she was eating popcorn, because I was so worried about weight. It was bizarre. But then when you step out of that, it's like the operating system you have for guiding your decisions is no longer relevant. Do you think it's...
Yes.
How difficult has it been to build that new operating system, or is it something you're still struggling with?
No, I'm still struggling, and I'll tell you why. And I've thought a lot about this. As a young, let's say, single 20-year-old something, your life is so much more simple than a married businessman, family man, with all the mortgage payment commitments and social, commitments that you have to go to. It's easy to be so simple when you're in your 20s and you're single, or even if you've just got a girlfriend. When you have kids, it changes beyond belief. And I said this to young teammates of mine at the time. Enjoy the simplicity of your life, because when it goes, it never ever comes back. And complexity is hard, because you never get the fulfillment in that simple way, because you're always compromising a whole bunch of other things. Do you know what I mean? If I can't think of too many examples, but I just have to think about how much you spend your time. If I go away every weekend and race, I'm going to miss my kids growing up. I don't want to do that. And if I focus purely on money, I'm going to work, hard, long hours. I won't be there to read bedtime stories. They'll be in secondary school before I know it, and then they're left home. That's not what I want. That's not why I had kids. Those things, and that complexity grows slowly in your life as you become sort of mid-30s, mid-40s. I'm 43 now, so I've had a fair run at complexity. But
it's also quite nuanced as well, because
also,
you can't have that binary lens. Before, you're able to say, well, does it make me faster or slower on the bike? An intuitive one now would be, well, is it better or worse for my family? But it doesn't work the same, because
yes,
to kind of cheesy expression, you need to put your own mask on first. If you didn't ride your bike and you weren't in a good headspace, and you didn't peel away that selfish time, you're not going to be a good role model to your kids. You're not going to be a good husband to your wife. You're not going to be the best version of yourself. So it is difficult to figure out where that balance lies.
Yeah, 100%. And I think men and women struggle with this differently. I hope my wife doesn't listen
I'm
to
definitely sending
this This is a common challenge. And not only that, I speak to all my peers who are married with kids, and we all have the same challenge. Just give us an hour on a Saturday morning, and you can have The 47 other hours of the rest of the weekend, I'll be 100% whatever you want. We'll go wherever you want. Just give me the hour first. And it's funny how, wives just, if they're not athletes or, I don't know, they just got their own agendas, they it's not that they don't understand it's important to you, but they can't appreciate the significance of the importance and the emphasis of how satisfied you are having got that out your system. Like you say, put your own mask on. It's not a huge amount of time. We'll go out early in the morning. And then the commitment to the rest of the family in terms of being there for football practice, swimming, going out to the beach or whatever. Like it is. And I talked to a friend of mine who's a lawyer, but also a very keen cyclist about this, and exactly the same. And always a constant battle as well.
100%. Let's take a little bit of a U-turn because we both raced in France. And one of my abiding memories of France was how shit the kit was. Like I was, maybe a little bit more obsessed than my peers at the time about aerodynamics. I'd scrimped together some money to get into the wind tunnel very early, and I was focusing on time trial, and I knew the importance of stuff flapping around. And then I went to France, and it was like training in a cotton t-shirt. It was absolutely shocking. But we've seen this incredible evolution over the last, what was I in France? Like over 10 years ago now. I'm aging myself there. But how do we get to this point now where the innovation in that industry is just being incredible? Like the kit it's every brand, all the top brands nearly are like a work of art. How have we got here?
Well, I think it's good for a start. I remember the kit that we had to wear exactly like you, but I was probably 10 years earlier. I went to France in 2000. And yeah, thankfully I was back then I was actually pretty oblivious to it. I knew I wanted a good fitting jersey, and occasionally we pinned them. You pinned them.
Well, actually,
tight.
Legitis, we had our shorts used to ride up. So it was a blue and red kit for apogee. So you'd have to get red insulating tape and run it around your thigh to stop the short riding up like hot pants, like Miley Cyrus for the end of the race.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, I mean, I lived with a couple of other teammates, English guys at the time, 2001, 2002. And there's all sorts of funny stories of things being done like that. But I think the progression is pretty impressive, actually. And it kind of feels like it is where it should be. But it's not happened smoothly. Brad talks about this, actually. When Team Sky first started wearing speed suits or skin suits in road races, they were ridiculed by the Italian, French, pros at the time, Pozzato and a few of the other guys, just to name a few. And I think that's quite interesting because UK actually, and also like some of the Southern Hemisphere, like Australian brands, have been much quicker to progress in the development of kit than what you might think of as more heritage, Nalini, the European brands. And I thought about this quite a lot. And actually, I kind of boiled it down to heritage and tradition are probably some of the biggest barriers to progress, because you'll still see someone like Alaphilippe winning in a shorts and jersey. Now, anyone who's been to the wind tunnel, I don't know how much you've been since you scrimped that money together, but I've been probably 100 times, and lots of people use it as like, well, he's winning in shorts and jersey, so it doesn't matter. And I'm like, no, he would win more if he wore a suit. Like every time he finished second or third, count that as a win as well. What would his palmares look like? They would be bonkers, like incredible, and that's irrefutable data. There's no, the fact that he can do it anyway is a separate point altogether. They just don't compete. Yeah,
because there's so much talent there.
Skin suits and
like I
suits.
remember my teammate in France, he was the Irish under-23 time trial champion that year. A great friend of mine, and he was really dialed on his aerodynamics, like pimped out as much as you could be back then. And we were riding the time trial, and he was caught in the time trial by one of our teammates who was on a road bike and had his jersey fully zipped down with his hairy chest and his medallion out. And he's like, yeah, keep going, Aaron. Well done. There was just a different level of talent. You could deduce into that. It's like correlation, causation. Like firemen always show up at fires. Does that mean firemen cause fires? No, it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I always say this, like 95% of talent is just talent. And it's really, really annoying if you haven't got the talent, because you can work your arse off, but you're only working for 5%. So if you're only 75% anyway, you're never going to get anywhere near someone with real talent who could be 95% of what you could be anyway.
Painful reality. But how do you see the industry now changing? Like AI, it looks like it's going to be a huge disruptor in every industry, and the separation is largely going to be, in my view, people and businesses that embrace AI and people and businesses that don't embrace AI, and knowledge and access to knowledge could be very
definitely
important in the next 10 years.
I'm reading a really interesting book at the moment called Machines That Change Markets. And it's basically the invention of every prominent thing, from the steam engine to electricity to the telephone, and people's first impressions of them versus what they went on to change in our world. And pretty much 100% of the time, there are very influential people damning the new invention, like the telephone. And even things like Blockbuster, video rental company, could have bought Netflix for 100 grand, is a classic example of did not adopt online technology, stayed in that analog world and just totally died, like simple. So I think AI is going to have a similar kind of, I think it's more, firstly, it's more kind of widely recognized as going to change and for the better. But how exactly it's expressed and implemented and assimilated into current day worlds and businesses and lives, I think is still, I do actually watch quite a lot of podcasts on this, because as a parent, I feel a bit concerned around what our kids are going to grow up into and how that world's going to change. And and what should I be kind of encouraging them to focus on that is still going to be relevant in 20 years time, when they need to get a job. So I do think there's still quite a lot of speculation. I'm not sure exactly, which roles will be hardest hit and which will be, most valuable, because it can't be delivered by AI. But it's definitely going to change the world. And I think actually, I feel positive that it will be a very positive influence on our lives. And while I read another book recently, basically catastrophes always make the news, but incremental progress of the positive kind just don't. And it actually really warps our perspective on reality. So basically, a reality check is there are more kids going to school in all parts of the world now than ever before, as a proportion, not as a quantum number. There are more girls getting equal education to boys, which again, in certain parts of the world was massive gap. There is less poverty, more access to electricity, which means education and food and nutrition and all these things. Like, it is all better. Every single country on the planet is moving in the right direction at a trajectory that is pretty substantial, but it just doesn't make the news because it's incremental. And I think AI can be something similar that is going to help all of us benefit from the contribution that it's going to make, which is going to be a quantum leap, I think, in our societies and in our ability to deliver results.
Yeah, I have a friend who's quite a prominent entrepreneur, and he reckons in 12 months, any company worth its salt needs to be employing a chief AI officer. And that means someone who's figuring out and just keeping a finger on the pulse of that AI ecosystem to figure out new ways to integrate AI into your business. Because in the short term, if you're an employee, AI is not coming for your job right now. Like, a robot's not coming to do my podcast. But somebody that knows how to use AI is coming to replace somebody that doesn't know how to use AI. And I think that's the short-term trend as I see it.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So basically, head of AI is the new most important role.
maybe. You're back in the world tour this year with Bora Hansgrove, and probably the nicest kit actually in the peloton this year, in my opinion. How does that come about?
Is that because I got a few Irish... Is that because I've got a few Irish guys in the team?
You're not giving Bennett much love, though.
I know. He's struggling a bit. Although Jumbo at the Tour of Britain at the moment.
Yeah, I think word around the campfire is he's off to Agie Desert for next season. I'm not sure the truth in that, but yeah, he's had a troubled enough time.
What a catch. Roadman, you know how serious I take my goal setting. And I know how serious you take it too. So whether you're chasing fitness or lifestyle goals and you're looking for a powerful ally to support you on this journey, look no further than Huel. Huel has become my secret weapon for when I don't have time to prepare a balanced meal. It means I get the nutrition I need without sacrificing time or taste. Plus, it stops me from reaching for the takeaway menu. I always throw a bottle of this banana into my backpack when I'm heading into the city, and it stops me eating junk convenience foods that don't support my training goals. It's handy, it's nutritious, it's 22 grams of protein. It's perfect for athletes that don't have time to cook or prepare food before a training session. It's convenient, nutritious fuel at your fingertips, ensuring you hit your daily fueling needs. Huel Ready to Drink has over 26 essential vitamins and minerals in every bottle, making sure you get 175 health benefits. Plus, it's made from amazing natural ingredients like sunflower seed, coconut, and more. And the best part, 8 mouth-watering flavours. My favourite's the banana. That's what's in my backpack at the moment. You can get Huel direct to your home by going to huel.com/roadman. That's Huel, HUEL.com/roadman.
Like, how does that partnership come about? Because from the outside looking in, these are incomprehensibly big deals that get done, but they're always shrouded in a veil of mysticism. Like, what's the courting relationship like to make this happen?
It actually follows a very similar pattern to how it would be if you were looking for a girlfriend.
You got them drunk.
You kind of sometimes, yeah, absolutely. Basically, you kind of make it known that you're available as a brand or as a team, both ways, and then you kind of say to tell all your friends, or look out for me, won't you? If you hear of anything or anyone or any contracts coming up, let me know. And then actually the Bora deal was a LinkedIn message from Ralph Denk, the owner of the team, and I was like, oh yeah, I like Bora, that's a good team. Because also, you've got to find a match. There's a cultural match that is really important. There's a financial match because, some teams are commanding much bigger license fees than others. And then there's the kind of results and activation match, as in you need to be able to speak about it, talk about it, and engage that story into your audience and into the comms plan that you share with the database as much as possible. Otherwise, you're not extracting the full value, and you're wasting money basically spending it on European races that just don't get enough airtime in the brand. So all of those things are kind of quite carefully considered, but Bora's been a fantastic deal for us. We've won stages of every Grand Tour. We've had a yellow jersey and we won the Giro in the last 2 years. Like, it's been phenomenal. And for us as a brand to have that validation has been a massive boost, but it hasn't come for free. A lot of people don't realize, or maybe don't realize until you do it, that servicing a World Tour team is so extremely hard. Like, they are incredibly demanding. And the way I would describe the package before Bora and then now this year's package, basically I'd spent a lot of time in the wind tunnel because I got declined a contract from a team because they didn't believe I was going to be the kit was going to be fast enough. So basically I spent a ton of money and time and employed an aerodynamicist and went to the wind tunnel to make it the fastest kit in the peloton. And we basically, across the whole package, we had a really, really fast package. But when it came to the team, the Bora team, for the first year, they were like, look, the speed suit is fast, but it's good for time trials. But actually doing a 6-hour Grand Tour stage or, Monument, it's actually a little bit uncomfortable. And we need to make some progress on this for some developments. So I basically worked really, really hard to make the speed gains that I'd developed in the wind tunnel myself more comfortable, more usable, and more accessible to every rider, to the point where in the first season, only about half the riders chose to wear their speed suits, and the other half stuck to jerseys. The jerseys had been to the tunnel as well, so they were still really fast compared to your average jersey, and even compared to a lot of other skin suits. But this year, I would say 85 to 90% of the team wear their speed suit 90% of the time. And that's a massive statement of how much progress has been made, not just with the performance, but also with comfort, with the durability, with how comfortable and how happy they are to be in that product every day, all day, 6-7 hours a day.
Can you measure the return on investment from this deal?
No. Which sounds bizarre, which sounds really weird. Like, and I'm a data-driven person, so I want to know how well has that pound performed. That's how I break it down. You know, it might be one of 1,000, one of 10,000, one of 1,000,000, one of 10 million, but I'll break it down to the pound, and I'll be like, I want that pound to have worked. In my mind, I have like a metric of performance, a bit like I have a metric of performance for my own time, for everybody in the company's time, and then for our time collectively, how much progress we can make. But it's so hard to just really validate substantially without any kind of ambiguity or doubt or grayness. It's impossible, but I can tell you categorically that it's worth it. If you get the right deal and the right team and they get the right results, it's worth it. But you can also really mess it up. Like, there are stories of kit providers getting the whole first batch delivered wrong, either wrong logos or wrong features or something wrong, and it costs, I don't know, £300,000 or £400,000 to correct that problem. Thankfully, we didn't make any mistakes like that. But that way, you're now on it's going to take 3 more years to get your value back from that deal because you just wasted £300,000 on a mistake, a human error mistake. But
I think it's okay that you can't measure it, and this freaks marketers out. But like right now, I'm wearing a pair of Jordans. Like, why am I wearing a pair of Jordans? How have they found their way onto my feet? Is it because I went onto Nike's website and they cookied me and used code Nike15 on a podcast at checkout? No, it's none of those things that are measurable. It's because LeBron wears them. It's because Jordan. It's because of Phil Knight and Shoe Dog. It's because of The Last Dance. It's because of long form storytelling over decades. That's why I'm wearing Jordans. And this is the task I have at the podcast all the time. I'm like, your discount code, Roadman 15 at checkout, it doesn't represent the value of long form conversations, because your storytelling, your brand building, it's as cliche as it sounds. I think podcasting, these long form discussions, there's something primal or ancestral about them. It's like a throwback to when we'd sit around a campfire and me and you would be, eating a leg of a cow over a fire and drinking some poutine. Like, we're wired to listen to these conversations, and it's kind of refreshing to hear that you don't have that hardcore metric for measuring ROI.
Well, we do. I just can't apply it to World Tour teams
because I had Rob,
but that's okay.
Rob Gillette that sponsors Israel Premier Tech. He's the founder of Factor, and he's the same challenge. Yeah. It's like, I know it works, but I just can't show you in black and white on a spreadsheet why it works.
Yeah. And I don't mind that. I mean, I think you're right though about this long form kind of conversations and content, because like, I really want to wear Nike Air Jordans, but I don't think they suit my feet. But I really want to be part of that brand. I watched The Last Dance. It was one of the best Netflix series you could ever watch, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, so really, like, those are important as well to recognize, because you're trying to recreate that. I'm trying to recreate something like that for my own brand. So I look at the Phil Knight story, I look at Jordan's story. There's loads, and I've read all the books as well. Lots and lots of entrepreneurial startup books, and I'm not reading them just because they're interesting. I'm reading them because I'm trying to extract as much information as possible. What are the common denominators? What are the patterns? What are the ingredients that we need to apply to create something similar? Because I think if you've got a bunch of similar ingredients, you can at least hope for some similar results. If you can't even get the right ingredients in the right place, then
I was reading a World Health Organization report recently, and forecasted to be the biggest killer in the next 10 years. It's none of these crazy pandemics that we can imagine up. It's not AI. It's loneliness. When I thought about that,
yeah.
I know so many people, maybe not firsthand, but friends of friends that have killed themselves in the last 5 years. But the antidote to loneliness for me, it's connection and it's community. And cycling does this so well. I'm wondering, how seriously do you guys take community, and what are you doing to build community around the brands?
100%. Like, I could not agree more. And I think this is where, like, I hope that we as a brand and me as an individual can compete with other brands in an authentic way. Because one of the things I was going to say about like the long form media and content, you can't really create that without integrity. Like, you have to have some real insight. You have to have a proper connection to what you're talking about. You have to have some experience, and you have to believe in it and want it to be relevant. Otherwise, you're a fraud, and it will come across quite easily, I think, in this type of media. If you're not really living what you say you're living, then you can be found out, kind of thing. So for me, community is about, I'll go back to another thing you said, which I thought was really useful, is, put your own mask on first. So when I started this business, one of the key aspects of what I wanted to create was a thriving, nurturing, nourishing environment for myself to feel good, be strong, and be my best, right? That was a really simple objective. And I've done it through a company. But secondly, once I get those ingredients locked in for me, I know what they look like, I know what it feels like to have them missing, and I know the combinations and timings when they'll really matter the most. And I work really, really hard for my team to give them those ingredients at the right time, when it's relevant, when it matters, and when they'll feel it, at the most. And, ideally, it's so as they can do their best job. But I don't want them to just have a good job. I want them to be happy at home, have, strong relationships with their partners and their kids. I want them to have a good work-life balance, so as they don't come to work stressed, fed up, depressed, whatever, because they'll be on a churn. I'll be having to recruit them. So for me, that is so fundamentally part of the core of this brand, in the office, in the way I approach cycling, in the way I like to talk to other people who are cyclists and share stories, and, everything that anyone can experience on a bike. I've also been there, and I've felt it. I've suffered, and I've, been elated with all the same kind of experiences. I've just done it thousands of times. I've written it down. I've thought about it. I've kept diaries for years and years and years. I go back and look at them. Again, I'm trying to extract as much value out of that experience as possible. And I think that, for me, forms the absolute backbone of a community. That if you are connected to me as an individual, or us as a brand, L'Ecole as a brand, then I'll be disappointed if you don't get that sense of care, concern, and want for your well-being. I think it's really important. And same for my kids. I don't really distinguish that much different between wanting to give my kids the best life, and I mean it in a balanced way, versus wanting my employees to have the best life, and then wanting anyone who's come in contact with the brand to go, oh, you know what? That's a really good job.
Yanto, from the outside looking in, I thought this was a brand that's on the up. Now, having had a chance to spend the last hour talking to you, I'm absolutely sure this is a brand that's on the up. Thanks very much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Yanto. I really enjoyed that. That was so much fun.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in to today's interview. If you like this interview, I'm going to put another interview up here, which I know you're really going to enjoy. And please click on that subscribe button. Talk to you soon.